Audio Freelander. And this is going to be the first of what I hope will be an ongoing series of studio classes. These are classes that I have really been wanting to hold for the singers who work with me, for singers who are interested in possibly working with me or learning a little bit more practically some of the things that I've written about in my articles and my books. So I'm very grateful to Carnegie Hall for offering this beautiful space that we can all convene in. I'm always looking for ways to augment the one-on-one lesson paradigm, because I feel like we all need a little bit more for retention, for help in understanding concepts, for help in just practicing in between lessons. And I think it can be really helpful to see how the same issues that you may be working on apply to another singer. Because while each of our instruments is really unique, and voices can seem to function very differently, if you've got like a dramatic bass versus a soubrette, very different repertoire, musical theater repertoire versus classical repertoire, it can be very interesting to see the ways that the fundamentals, the things that we all need to work on, are the same regardless of your voice type, your level of experience, or the repertoire that you'd like to sing. So my idea is that there's going to be a specific topic for each of these classes, and today I would like to talk about something that is very dear to us all, I'm sure, modulating vocal registers. So I'd like to just introduce the class by talking a little bit about the way that I view vocal registers and the way that I would like to explore the way that these things manifest in the repertoire that all of you are going to share with us this evening. When I first started studying singing, the terminology was pretty consistent. Everybody talked in terms of chest voice versus head voice, that you had a sort of heavier, weightier vocal production that would be there in your low range, and then a higher, flutier, falsettoier production that would be happening in your high range, and then our job was to try to figure out how to blend these two registers together. Well, as I started learning more about vocal technique, and especially about vocal anatomy, it became clear to me that this model of thinking about registers, which comes down to us from the great masters of the bel canto era, probably even earlier, were things that people figured out that were useful, that still help us today, but did not completely align with the anatomy involved that causes registration. And so rather than thinking of registers as being divided into two things that then need to be unified, I find it preferable to think about registration as being a continuum. We have one pair of vocal folds, and they're capable of being very short and very thick, producing low notes and heavy registration, and they're capable of being stretched very long and very thin, producing high notes with lighter registration. And so it's just this one pair of vocal folds that's amazingly malleable. It morphs from being short and thick to long and thin, and there are different possibilities for how thick, how heavy the registration can be, depending on where you are in your range, depending on how you've trained yourself to sing, the requirements of your repertoire, and just the way that you conceive of it. So often when singers first come to me, they'll complain that they feel like they can't move smoothly between their registers, or that they've got a hole in the middle voice, and that this is going to be something that they're going to have to work on for the rest of their lives, or that it's a problem that's unique to them. I think that registration is something that we all have to work on, and the main reason that I think this is something that we all have to work on is because the way that we develop the muscles of registration is in an imbalanced way, just because we are speaking for so many years before we learn to sing, or before we have a mature instrument that's capable of navigating the full range. So in talking about these muscles of registration, I'm going to offer you an oversimplification first. There are two groups of muscles that are primarily responsible for registration. The thyroarytenoid, or TA muscle, is housed within the vocal folds themselves, and the TA is responsible for keeping the vocal folds short and thick, or shortening, thickening vocal folds, and so it dominates in the low range. The cricothyroid muscles are the muscles that are primarily responsible for stretching the vocal folds longer and thinner, and so they're going to be governing your high voice head register, if you think in those terms. And so what we need to be able to do is coordinate these two muscles together so that they can partner efficiently. So I would like you all to give yourselves a more visceral experience of this by just comparing it to another pair of muscles that we all know how to use very efficiently. Everybody extend your arm, try not to smack the person sitting next to you. And now I would like you to bend your elbow. And now I'd like you to straighten out your arm. So this movement is called elbow flexion, and this is elbow extension. The muscles responsible for elbow flexion are your biceps. The muscles responsible for elbow extension are your triceps. And these muscles work very efficiently together. I can do all kinds of crazy things with my elbow. I can do it fast, I can do it slow, because I've been moving my elbow around pretty much since I was born. We call this relationship between the biceps and the triceps an agonist-antagonist relationship, because they have to work together to balance things out. Well, the TA and the CT, thyroarytenoids and the cricothyroid muscles, also have an agonist-antagonist relationship. But they don't work together in as well a balanced fashion. They don't develop as organically as our muscles that govern elbow movement develop, because we aren't using our whole range from the time that we're born. We're mostly just speaking in this part of the world in a very low place with heavy registration. And so the thyroarytenoids get very strong, and they get used to doing everything. And then when we first learn how to sing, we find out there's this whole other range that we're capable of accessing that seems so different from the way that we use our voices when we're just speaking, that we think it's this whole other part of the instrument, without realizing that this is just another muscle that's there to help out the thyroarytenoids to control pitch and registration. So that's one of the reasons I think that it seems like there is this thing that needs to be blended when we're talking about low registers, high registers, and also why it can be so challenging to navigate that no man's land between where our speaking range is and where the rest of our singing range is. Especially for women, what we call the primo passaggio, usually around a B flat and an F in the low range, things can become very unstable. And that's where we feel like, oh, I need to sort of like mix my registers because it's not clear that I should be using the heavier weight or the lighter weight. But I think that no man's land is there just because we're so used to using the TA, and we have to become accustomed to using the CT muscles that it just seems like it's this other thing and we have to mush them together, whereas if we understand that they just really have this very organic agonist-antagonist relationship and figure out how to let them work together well, then we start to experience registration as being on a continuum and noticing that we have options for how heavy, how light we want to sing pretty much anywhere in our range once you develop this. So hopefully we'll be able to make all of this a lot clearer with the work that we're going to do this evening. Now, I have framed this class by saying, okay, we're going to talk about modulating registration today, but I'm going to work with whatever comes up. If it can be framed in terms of working on registration, then I'm going to take advantage of that. But if there's something that seems more important, more pressing for any of you who are singing this evening, then we'll focus on that instead. Okay? So, let's get to it. And please, when it's your turn to sing, just introduce yourself, say who you are, let us know what it is that you're going to be singing, and we'll go from there.
Hi, my name is Anna Wilson, and I'm going to sing Va, Laisse couler mes larmes from Werther.
Beautiful.
work with you on seeing if we can access a little bit more of the heft that I know that you have in your low range. But before we do that, I'd like to just talk a little bit about articulation. The French language probably has more lip vowels than any other language that I'm aware of. And all of us, even if you were from a French-speaking country, we all tend to underutilize our lips. And I would like to see and hear you engage your lips a little bit more when it's appropriate on the O's and Oo's and schwas. And the reason that I want to address that first is because all of these complicated things that have to be moving around in this very limited space here, if there's anything that's interfering with range of motion for what your larynx needs to do to be able to access the full range of motion and be able to modulate your registration well, then we need to address that first. I'm not saying that engaging the lips is going to automatically change anything, but I want to just sort of get that coordination down a little bit more first. So check in with your lips and let me hear you just go, ah, wah, wah. Ah, wah, wah. Good. Okay, so she can do it. Some people have trouble engaging their lip muscles, but you've got very high-functioning lips. The strangest compliment anybody's given you today. And notice which vowels in the first couple of lines actually require your lips. Can you just sort of speak through the first couple phrases?
Va laissa couler mes larmes.
Good. So she got the oo, but the schwa also requires or benefits from engaging your lips. And I think that the schwa in French is one of the things, it was hardest for me to get used to using my lips on schwa because it's such a neutral vowel that doing something so specific and actually intentionally engaging seemed like, well, how can I do that if it's an unaccented vowel? But you get used to it. So schwa and oe and o slash are all variants, they're mixed vowels, they're variants on a or e plus lips. So now let me hear you go, transform e to by just engaging your lips. Laisse, larme, Right. You feel how much more you're engaging your lips now than you were before?
Mm-hmm.
Can I just hear you sing that opening phrase and see if you can engage your lips more on the opening and on the schwas?
Sure.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you laugh. What happened is what often happens is you did use your lips on the schwas, and then they kind of stayed there. That's the other thing. This is something that happened to me, and you may have experienced this as well. Once you figure out how to engage your lips, and you want to keep them there. But what you need to be able to do is just use them when you need to, and not when you don't. But notice how many of these sounds in this aria do require your lips. Les larmes qu'on ne pleure pas.
Les larmes.
So le doesn't need them.
Les larmes qu'on ne pleure pas.
Right. And then you have to relax on the pa. Qu'on ne pleure pas.
Qu'on ne pleure pas.
Dans notre âme.
Dans notre âme.
Retombe.
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 Toute. See, almost every vowel requires the lips. So here it's more about making sure you're relaxing your lips and defining the vowel that you need to when it doesn't call for lips than not. Can I just hear you sing that? Le larme, enjoy singing French repertoire. We've got some more French repertoire tonight. To just check in and make sure that you're really engaging your lips well on the lip vowels. One of the reasons that I encourage this is that there are other ways to pronounce these words I can say redobe, redobe without engaging my lips, but redobe is automatically much more resonant. And the reason for this is that if I'm not adjusting the resonant space so that you hear one of these vowels, the O or the then I'm going to have to adjust the shape of the resonating space doing something else. And the main candidate for this is the base of the tongue. So if you don't have to engage something that's connected, pretty closely to your larynx, the base of the tongue is connected to the hyoid bone from which the larynx is suspended. If you don't have to engage it, then don't. And the lips are wonderful. They're not attached to most of the other moving parts of your voice, so they're very efficient for articulation. And then that will free up your larynx so that we can talk about registration. Let's do the next phrase. What is it? Just speak it for me.
Et de leur passion.
So it's et de leur passion. It was a little slow and really good. Not it's et de.
Et de leur passion de
Passion.
te goutte martèle, le cœur triste est là.
Good. Sing that for me.
Et de leur
Et de leur. Yeah.
Et de leur passion
Once you do, and that's going to go away in a day or two in my experience, because they're just like any other muscle fibers. They work them to fatigue and then they get worn out. You're not going to build up great big strong muscular lips by doing this. It's just a question of engaging these muscle fibers that you're not used to and just having them be a little bit more supple. Okay, so I think that Anna is modulating her registration very well throughout this aria, but because I know her voice, I know that you do have more heft that you have access to, especially on the bottom. So I just want to see if we can incorporate a little bit more into that. Is that the D? Let me hear you go. Ni, ne, na, no, do. Just kind of speak it in a nice, heavy speaking voice.
Ni, ne, na, no, no.
Now, let me hear you go. Ni, ne, na, no, do. And see if you can allow it to stay a little heavier. Good. Now what we sometimes hear with this aria is people like to kind of like chest out that last line, to la brise, which then sounds to me not quite like what a character should do, but just for fun, I'd like to hear you do that. So then use your lips on the O and O. Change, but you can hear how that's a different texture from what she was doing before. Do that again. Yes, and also you might notice that she's having an easier time portamentoing down because it wasn't in a different world. You were able to make a better connection. That's why I mean when I say that registration exists on a continuum. You want to be able to get from one note to any other note that you would sing, and feel like it's all in the same world. Feel like the instrument just functions really smoothly. And so if you're modulating your registration well, so that you don't feel like you suddenly have to downshift to go breeze, then you're going to be able to make a smoother, more musical and dramatically impactful connection between those notes. Let me hear you go again. Good. And I'm exaggerating right now. I don't think that you should necessarily sing it the way that I don't get to sing this aria. But the way that you're responding to it is really good. Do that again. Et trop fragile.
Et trop fragile.
Start with the heavier one.
Et trop fragile.
Now, show us what happens if you go et trop fragile. How much of that can you include on the way up?
Okay. Et trop fragile.
Yeah.
So what do you want me to do?
Well, sing the phrase.
Oh.
Sorry.
Et trop fragile pour la brise.
Good.
La brise.
Good. Now, I didn't feel like she was dragging up weight in a way that was going to be harmful in any way to your voice. Did you?
No,
If
it's easy.
uncomfortable?
Yeah.
Can you sing to me? Please, is that a C sharp? It's please to, yeah. So when you go, it will find you into the breeze. Is that right? Then you go, breeze.
Brise.
Breeze. Can you find your way back there now?
Brise.
Really nice. Okay, let me hear those last two lines again and let it be weighty.
Et trop fragile pour la brise. La brise.
Really nice.
Thank you.
These last phrases are sometimes difficult to get through on one breath, and I always wondered why, because they're not that long. Maybe you've never had any trouble with this, but I've worked with mezzos who are really good singers who struggle with just being able to get through them, and I think it's because of the registration issues at the end of this aria. That if you are able to sing with in a way that your vocal folds are approximating cleanly throughout, and modulating your registration well, then you're going to be using your air very efficiently. But if you feel like you constantly have to be subtly switching back and forth between registers and masking the fact that that's what you're doing, then that ends up using a lot of breath and energy. So then the question is, can you sing the long ascending lines of this aria, starting more like that? Les larmes qu'on ne pleure pas. What pitch does that start on? That's the D again.
Yeah.
So let's find out where we go from that D. Let me hear you go again. Les larmes qu'on ne pleure pas.
Les larmes qu'on ne pleure pas.
Okay, so start there and see what happens. But see if you can just stay grounded in this world of just a little bit more
Okay.
of the weight of the world that's bearing down on Charlotte now.
Et than I thought there was, and just giving me permission to use it was really helpful.
Yeah, I thought it worked really well. And this isn't to say that everybody should, see how heavy you can possibly sing. But knowing how her voice functions, I was curious to see how much of that could inform, because you love singing Baroque music and you love singing in ensembles, and so Anna's a really good musician, and she's used to being modulating her timbre and the weight of your voice to suit whatever the repertoire it is that you're singing. So you can still do all of that, but having access to your whole instrument in the way that you would need to take on an aria, a role that requires this kind of power and stamina, then this is the way that you go about starting to engage that. Mm-hmm. I also feel like some of the low ascending phrases that we were looking at, they start on the low note and then go up. They're marked piano. And so you might indeed want to sing them a little bit more softly and intimately than you did just now. The problem is that sometimes I think we equate piano, softer dynamics, with lighter registration. And there's a way in which that can work, but for the most part, you really want to be singing with your whole instrument. So it might be an easier way to get a softer dynamic to just use a sort of lighter registration and texture. But if you can figure out how to keep your whole voice engaged, keep your whole body engaged, and then vary the dynamics from there, which is just more a function of your imagination, and I think the way that you use your breath, then it's preferable and it'll be more beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have Carol Wong. We can be more informal with this. So should we shift gears, or should we stay in the mezzo world? What do you think? Or maybe it's a question of who wants to sing. You guys want to duke it out? Lindsay.
Oh boy.
Well, we'll
sure.
talk about it at some point.
Fine.
So come talk to us about the repertoire.
Okay. Well, what would you like me to
Well,
do?
I asked you to bring two pieces.
Yes.
And
So I can do them both. Do you have them by chance? That there's a
This is the
French room and
the Resnick Education, and then it was also.
there's a music theater piece.
Ooh.
Yes, indeed. Called Superboy and the Invisible Girl. Yes, great.
Yes.
Okay, that's a great.
Yes. So is it alright if I use a stand just to make sure I know what I'm doing?
Let's grab you a different one. Great.
This would be really good for registration because I've been teaching all day.
Okay, so can we do the art song first?
Yeah, sure.
Wherever you like. Okay, so this is also going to serve as Lindsay's warm-up. I had asked Lindsay to bring something classical and something musical theater-y because she does both. And when she sings classical music, she's a high soprano. And when she sings musical theater, she sometimes gets very serious about belting. So I thought that she would be a great person to show us how registration can vary.
All right. Yeah, so this is just a little matinee art song thing. And you also asked me to bring something that goes down below the staff in addition.
Yeah, it's just that we can mess it up as much as possible.
Right. Cool.
Can you just tell us a little bit about this song?
Oh, sure. It's a song by Massenet, and it's just essentially about my life is over because my lover has left me. That's about the sum of it.
Would it be okay if I asked you to sing these two pieces back to back?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Toujours voice, but I thought it would be good because I teach a lot of belting as well, so, and it mostly sits in kind of middling belting land, but pops up to a D a couple of times, and I have a tendency to just always mix it, so I don't know. Or like have a slightly lighter registration, and perhaps I could, I'm not sure. So she is singing basically about her dead brother is her mother's hallucination, and so she is singing essentially about the angst of being unseen with her brother, who is not alive, but more seen than she is. So I don't know, you can either, how about not do the repeat of the first two measures? And thanks. Superboy, the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince, she's not there. Superboy, the invisible girl, everything a kid ought to be. He's immortal, forever alive, then there's me. I wish I could fly and magically appear and disappear. I wish I could fly and fly far away from here. Superboy, the invisible girl, he's the one you wish would appear. He's your hero, forever your son. He's not here, I am here. Take a look at the invisible girl. Here she is, clear as the day. Please look closely and find her before she fades away. Superboy, the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there. She's not there. She's not there. She's not there. Really
Okay, so you were saying that you just came from full day teaching. And
Yes, and I have
you're
crazy
warmed up.
allergies, and so it feels
So, well,
really
you have nothing
funny.
to apologize for, because if that's what you sound like when you're not warmed up. So, but how, just for perspective, how did that go for you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess as you were speaking about earlier, the middle feels fairly thin, and like things are not quite working together. And then in this piece, super interesting because I felt like it all felt heavier than normal, and that coming down from the top, I wasn't able to like modulate back into the sort of heavier spot.
Okay, well, I thought that it went pretty well, and let's see if we can make it go
Okay, great.
more easily. Of course, this is the thing when you're working in a sort of studio class, master class type situation. That like the second time it's going to be better because it's the second time. So now Lindsay's a little bit warmed up, so she's going to get more credit than I do for anything that we're able to achieve here. But can we go back to the Resnickers? And when I introduced the class, I described the fact that our muscles of pitch and registration have an agonist-antagonist relationship that's not so different from the way that our biceps and triceps work together. When I was working with Anna, the reason that I was asking her to do these ascending sirens is that starting low and going up is a really good way to make sure that you are engaging the thyroidnoid, that muscle that governs heavy registration, the same way that it's easier to sense what your bicep is doing if you start with your arm extended and then start to bend your elbow. Then it's like, oh, that's my biceps, that's what it's doing, right? Or that if I had to like pull something down, I'd start in this position and I really feel the triceps activate. So that's the equivalent. If I'm asking you to siren up, engage the muscle and see how well it can do on its own. And then one of the more useful ways to work on keeping your cricothyroid muscles, the muscles of higher pitches and lighter registration engaged, is to do descending work. So, and when you're trying to figure out what your registration options are for a given note, sometimes it's a good idea to approach it from both directions. So let's look at some of the lower pitches in the Resnick. I think there were a couple places where you said, yeah, the ave.
Yeah. I'm not just sure happens at each time.
Yeah. Can you just sing, is it okay to sing the phrase by itself? Is that okay
Yeah,
to
yeah.
start? Okay, so, actually just start from the beginning and then
Okay.
just sing that phrase and then stop.
Okay.
From a G on the staff to the G above the staff, and it was beautiful, smooth connection. I don't know what
it did not feel smooth at all. So that's good.
For the things that I was looking at,
Okay.
I felt like it was smooth. It was smoother
Mm.
than when you went back to the G. Did you hear she went back to the same note that she started on twice, but it didn't have quite the same presence. So I'd actually like to hear you sing just these first two bars here, but all on that lower G.
That's it. So the words would all have
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, du printemps d'autrefois.
Now, something else that's going to help that that G that she returns to is if you articulate the schwa a little bit more skillfully.
D'autre.
Yes. Do that again, all on the G.
Oh, du printemps d'autrefois.
Okay. Now sing it as written and see if you can be cognizant of allowing things to shift back into whatever happy place it needs to have the G, live where it started.
Okay.
Now that was better, but I think it's not just a technique thing. It's a musical thing. It's a 16th note, and it's an unaccented vowel.
Yeah.
But we still have to hear the vowel, and we still have to hear the pitch. So it may feel like you are emphasizing it too much or holding it too long.
Okay.
What is it? So if I go.
Yeah.
I don't think I sang it too long.
No.
Can you just do that for me? Good. And it's probably okay to have a little bit of a portamento in there too if you want. Is it okay? Can I have some portamento on Nasne? Do you think?
Yeah.
Especially if it sounds like that. Okay, so start it again and see if you can really just sort of like find the way to that note and that syllable both times that you have to do it. If you try to sing something correctly at the expense of letting your voice do what it's ready to do, then it's just not worth it because your voice won't do what it's not ready to do. That was really profound. So find out. I'm not saying don't be messy with your rhythms, don't be messy with your vowels or your registration, but just respect the requirements of the instrument that you're playing. Okay, so now how are we going to get down to that D? It's the same D. We have to come at it from a different direction. So let's do something similar. Can I hear you just go? Is that the D? Yeah, okay. Now, I felt like that got to a better place than when you were singing it, but I feel like it's still kind of stuck in a high register place. So come out from the other direction. Same thing from above. You feel it's getting a little bit stuck? There it is. legato, portamento-ish connection might help. Both times.
Just
Just that phrase, yeah. So,
So yeah, the bottom of that line.
yeah, bottom system.
Vous avez free,
Ave. Just do that for me.
Ave.
Good. And also the consonant can help.
Yeah.
V is a voiced consonant, and in French you always want your consonants to be really late, so you're going to put that consonant in the low note anyway.
Right.
And you go V, V, V.
A, V, V.
Much better.
Ave. Ave.
Single phrase.
Oh, sorry, what's that? Thank you. Vous avez free pour toujours.
Yes. Okay, so now she's allowing her registration to evolve more on the way down. It doesn't sound like it's in a different place, but it sounds more consistent with the rest of what you're doing.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the other piece. And I haven't seen this score. Let me just see what.
Oh, sure. I have an extra copy. Would you like it?
That's okay. I'll
Okay.
look with you. You sent it to me, and I needed just silent Carol.
Fine.
Okay. Okay. And okay. Just sing up to that point.
Okay.
Beginning. So for perspective, the first note is an F sharp, and there's going to be there will be D's involved.
So I can start right at 11. That is good for you. Superboy, the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there.
Now, okay, so she's more warmed up now.
True story, true story.
Now, I'm going to ask you to do something strange. What if I asked you to sing that with your opera soprano voice instead?
Okay.
Superboy!
Great. Superboy, the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there.
So how is that different?
Well, it just feels much more difficult, I think, which is interesting because again, after a day of teaching, it's so much easier to engage the TA muscles.
Yeah.
That it feels that lower passaggio place is really hard to navigate.
So this is like
in a more
worst case
classical way.
scenario.
It really is. Yeah.
Great. Great. Well, when your voice is less forgiving, sometimes that's where you really figure things out because you can't cheat, you can't compensate. You really have to do everything in well balanced. Okay, I want you to do one more thing, and I'd like you to just sort of speak through it in rhythm in that range, but not worry about that. So something like Superboy, the invisible girl.
Yep.
And Carol plays for it.
Great.
Okay.
Just to that point, especially
To that point.
Okay. Superboy, the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there.
That's great. Now, what if I ask you to do that one more time, but use your classical vowels?
Great.
Superboy. I can't do it the way that you're going to, but just let the vowels feel like they're more balanced.
Yeah. Okay.
Space.
Superboy, the invisible girl.
Don't
I can't
pitch
do
up.
it.
Don't pitch up. Here you go. Superboy and the invisible girl.
Superboy, the invisible girl.
But now she's switching into her classical.
No, it's weird.
Yeah. Okay, just say Superboy and the invisible girl the way you did before.
Superboy and the invisible girl.
And now just a little bit yawnier.
Superboy and the invisible girl.
Good. Okay, so speak
Okay.
like that once.
Superboy and the invisible girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there.
That sounds very comfortable to me now. Does it feel better to you?
Yeah.
Right. So similar to when we were working with Anna, I wanted to just kind of sort out the vowel thing and the lip thing before we started talking about registration. And same thing here. I just wanted to make sure that that you were allowing for enough comfortable vowel space for everything that you're doing, because I don't think that the way that she was resonating just now, the vowel shapes that she was using, were particularly classical or inappropriate for what you're doing. But I think that Lindsay is associating a kind of sort of shallow resonance with your larynx, slightly elevated, with the sound that you want for the song.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily a wrong thing, but let's try it this way
Yeah.
first. Okay, so just speak the first phrase again.
Mhm.
So Superboy.
Superboy and the Invisible Girl.
But what if you, okay, now sing it.
Yeah.
With the belty sound that you want, but with those vowels.
Okay.
Yeah.
Superboy and the Invisible Girl, son of steel and daughter of air. He's a hero, a lover, a prince. She's not there.
I think that sounds so much more
Yeah,
balanced.
yeah.
Is that still the right sound for the character?
I mean,
Or-
she's like 16, so probably not. But
Well,
but yes, I
think
think yeah.
this is the way that you want to sing it.
Yeah, I think
I'm not
so.
making you sing it in the way that you
Right?
want to
No,
sing
no, I think that's right.
it. Okay, so continue then.
Okay. Superboy and the Invisible Girl, everything a kid ought to be. He's immortal, forever alive. Then there's me. I wish I could fly and magically appear and disappear. I wish I could fly and fly far away from here.
This is just the wish is, it's a little bit higher. It's a B.
I think so.
Okay, let me hear you go. I wish.
I wish.
Because I feel like you're sort of throwing away the wish.
Yes.
a little bit.
Yeah.
I wish, and it just sort of gets out of alignment.
Okay. Yeah.
Let me hear you just start on the beginning. Go, I wish I could fly.
I wish I could fly.
Yeah, because that's what I wanted. I don't know the song well. I wish I could fly.
Wait, sorry. Where?
So you're gonna start. I want you to start on the B.
Oh, on the B.
Yeah,
I see.
yeah,
I
just
see.
the B instead of the A.
Great. Got
So
it.
instead of reaching up at it, but
Got
you're
it.
starting on it.
Mhm.
Because if you start high and then come down, rather than start low and then reach up, it's going to be a little bit easier for that muscle to engage. In fact, let me hear you go, I wish I could fly a little bit.
I wish I could fly.
I wish.
I wish.
Okay, but with the texture that you
Ha.
want there.
I wish I could
But
fly.
it's not as weighty as you wanted it to be.
No.
Okay, so that's, all right. It needs to be a choice.
Yeah.
Now, one caveat. Not all female voices, or male voices for that matter, are going to be able to belt high as easily, as comfortably as others, in the same sense that, like, not all of us can sing Wagner, and not all of us can sing, Queen of the Night. However, I think that you can probably sing a B with the
Yeah.
registration that you want.
Yeah.
The distinction is this: when I first started seeing if I could belt things, I thought that my job was to like keep everything as heavy as possible all the way. So is that the B? So I would think that I would have to do something like and keep everything as heavy as it was in my low range, which is very uncomfortable, doesn't feel very good. So what can you get away with?
Right.
Find out.
Okay.
So try that. Now, at some point, I feel like you kind of cheated a little bit, and you saw the palate drop. Go a little bit slower. Hang on to your jaw, and now that was more consistent, but I felt like you backed away from it a little bit. Can you have the energy continue to just move ahead? It still sounds like it doesn't have the energy you want.
Oh, really? Okay.
Like it's gonna feel like you're yelling
Yeah.
a little bit
Kind
more.
of more. Okay, great.
Yeah. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you go, I wish I could fly? Not like I just did it, but the way that you want to.
Yeah. I wish I could fly and magically appear and disappear. Am I on the right spot?
I did it.
Oh, because
Okay.
the second one. Right.
Oh,
Yeah.
well, I want to hear both of them.
Okay. Okay, great.
Perfect, yeah.
I wish I could fly and magically appear and disappear. I wish I could fly and fly far away from here.
Okay, so now maybe that's the way that Lindsay's going to want to shape those phrases, and maybe the way that you felt like you had to.
Yeah, correct.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So don't do that. I mean, sometimes you have to. Sometimes you have to, and it's fine because you can find a way to use like the skill and the instrument that you have to communicate whatever it is that you want to say. But if there's the possibility that just being able to keep that weight a little bit more, a little bit higher, is going to give you the sound that you want, then there's a way to work on it. Okay, so let's look at. So she's gonna have to do this higher, and probably you are going to have to let it evolve a little bit more, because even if you're doing a high belt, the registration has to evolve. Otherwise, you're going to sound like I did when I was demonstrating, like holding it all in the same place.
Right.
So where does this happen?
Happens here first.
Okay, so
And then it happens again just at the very end.
is it the same thing you have to approach from A?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go A
But that
to
one
D.
at least slides.
Can I have an A and a D? A, I just
Oh,
want to
with
hear the
Bottom of the next page.
yeah, but I just want to hear some pitches. Bottom of
I don't have the page number. It's like
It's on the
40.
bottom.
Yeah, 43.
it says he's not here, I am here.
Okay.
And so I just want to hear those two notes that go with that last bar here, the A and the D.
Okay.
Please for me. Okay, so let me hear you do the wall exercise with your classic voice. On those two pitches. Good. Now, I'd like you to start a little bit heavier, and I want you to slide on the slow part while on the fast part. So it's going to go something like, and so
Okay.
on. Good. Now, I felt like she did modulate her registration on the slow part as she went up. You let it change. You didn't get stuck the way you did better than I did. But this isn't my so I'm absolved. I'm going to do perfectly good. I'm not wound up either. Okay, do that again.
Okay.
Same thing on an E valve, because that's what you have. That was even better. Now, would you be happy with that degree of heft if you could have that in context? Okay, so let's where's a good place to start?
He's your hero, perhaps? That measure 40?
Is there a picture for you?
He is your hero, forever your son. He's not here. I am here. Because I felt like I totally changed it on the A in order to make that.
Okay, well, given the emotion of this and given the style, can you straight tone it? I am here, and then you can slide up, and then you can vibrate it.
Okay,
If you
sure,
want.
sure.
Right on it.
Okay.
I am here.
I am here.
Oh, we know you can do it because we just heard you do it.
Okay.
Just now that crack a little bit. Loosen up your jaw. I am here.
I am here.
I thought the whole thing was lighter though.
Yep.
I am here. Be brave.
I am here.
That worked. I mean, you had a little bit of a question mark.
Well, it's because it cracked a little bit on the way up.
I didn't hear it.
Oh, great.
Did you guys hear it?
No,
I didn't hear it crack.
heard.
Sometimes
Yeah.
you are
Yeah.
gonna feel registration changes, but we don't hear them. So,
Okay.
okay, do it one time.
I am here.
And then let it get weightier on the way down.
Uh-huh.
I am here. I'd have to work on that.
Yeah.
That's tough. Yeah. But you can do it.
I am here.
Yes. Really good.
Okay.
So that's how I would work on that.
Great.
Thank you for being
Super
willing
fun.
to share
Yeah, thank you.
these two different pieces. And it's great to hear how the same voice can apply to different styles, and it's the same instrument. It's the same instrument, and there are teachers and pedagogues doing wonderful work in crossover singing. If you guys want more resources for that, I've got some books I can recommend. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. You guys duke it out. Mark?
I mean, do we want to go back to French mezzo land, or do we want something that's not French?
I would love to hear French mezzo.
Hey friends, let's have some more French mezzo land. Though I'm actually going to be horrible and steal that stand back if I may.
I could subsist on a diet of French mezzo rep.
I'm so happy to hear that, because I could
Yeah.
spend my entire life singing French mezzo. I'd be very happy. Though I have to admit, this is an aria, so I'm cheating with the stand. It's very, 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 very new for me. Like, the last few weeks kind of new for me. And I feel like every registration shows I've tried, I haven't liked, so I'm excited to get a chance. Is this a good idea? Do you prefer?
I'm happy.
Oh, awesome. Okay, then now I'm going to see.
I'll hang on.
Scores for everyone.
Okay, so a mezzo who has no bad habits in Carmen.
I have no experience at all in Carmen. I think I'm going to be a unicorn. I live in hope.
Okay, so.
Oui, mais toutes seules on s'ennuie, et la vie qui sont à deux. Donc on peut tenir compagnie, j'emmènerai mon amoureux. Mon amoureux, il est au diable, je l'ai mis à partir. Mon pauvre cœur, très insalable, mon cœur est libre comme l'air. J'ai des galantes à la douceur, mais ils ne sont pas à mon prix. Voici la fin de la semaine. Qui veut m'aimer, je l'aimerai. Qui veut mon amour, il est à prendre. Vous arrivez au bon moment. Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant, dire au beau des aimés, j'ai mon ami Las Pascal. Nous danserons la série du baron du Manzanilla. La 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 la.
All right. It's new rep, and it's a good time to just be thinking about how do you want to work in a registration. Now, you just sang very rep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a mezzo with a powerful voice, and it's just figuring out how you want to where you want to distribute your resources with this. So, and when you use your speaking voice today, it sounds very, very focused and confident as well. So this is actually, I think, a good etude for working on registration. But first, just tell me how was that for you? It's new rep, and part of your attention was like, where am I? And,
Yeah, I don't know, maybe a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10. Really, not particularly good. I didn't feel like I was making efficient choices. Really, it was sort of more, let's just get through it and see what happens.
So what would you do differently?
I would like to be able to put more power, especially into the lower, especially as it begins with the public, and be able to come up without having that. She used the word before, the gear shift. That's a major sort of concern for me, is smoothing out that moment.
So it's sort of getting stuck in like second or third gear.
Exactly.
And not, but you've got automatic transmission.
You've
You've got like the top of the line Lexus with automatic transmission, so you don't have to worry about that. Well, eventually, that's what we all want to be. Okay, so okay, so let's start where it's kind of low and chatty, and just focus on that. Can you just speak this for me? This is, just say, je n'ai guère.
Je n'ai guère.
And just read through this whole thing as though it were a monologue. It doesn't have to be in rhythm either.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant.
Good. Do that again a little bit slower.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre.
Okay, so je n'ai guère is around where your speaking voice seems to be placed today. Carol, can you help me figure out what note that is? What is it?
A.
It's an A. Okay, so we're talking on an A. Let's talk on an A flat because that's better for the E flat we get to do. And I think you can. Let me hear you just go blah blah blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
And now just kind of speak blah blah blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Good. And that feels comfortable. Doesn't feel like you're like beefing up your voice or anyway. Say je n'ai guère.
Je n'ai guère.
Good. So there's heavier registration, which is comfortable for her because it's in your speaking range. But the E flat is really not that different. It's different. It's going to have to modulate a little bit, but it doesn't have to be in this other world. So do that again. Je n'ai guère.
Je n'ai guère.
It still sounds like it's moving towards singing because you're sustaining.
Je n'ai guère.
Say blah blah blah.
Blah, blah, blah.
Armin doesn't care. Je n'ai guère. She really doesn't. Yeah. Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre.
Je n'ai, actually sing it once. Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre. Oh, yeah.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant.
Good, do that again.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant.
Good. Now let me hear you go. Je n'ai guère.
Je n'ai guère.
That was pretty good. Was it comfortable?
It felt a little bit pushed, but not
Okay, do it one more time.
Je n'ai guère.
Okay, so I'm going to use Hillary to demonstrate this exercise that some of you I think have probably done with me. These slow massagers are really good at not only freeing up the little voice, the little muscles of articulation and phonation, but for providing feedback from what's happening. So the first thing that I need you to do is practice just making this rather strange noise. We haven't done this, have we? Okay, so I'd like you to use a sort of a hum, and I want you to start by humming sort of nasal, this obnoxious nasal. And then while you're doing that, I'd like you to apply the massager, which I'll turn on for you, to the lamina of your thyroid cartilage, which is really just like, it's just slightly to the side of your Adam's apple. So if I go, you hear what happens?
Yeah.
Now, the reason that I want you to start humming first is because for some reason when singers start with a massager on their throat, they get all precious and they go, I don't know why that is, but
I'll do my best to be obnoxious.
okay. So the position is just like right a little bit closer to the center. So there it is. Okay. So if you're it's really weird, but it's very useful. The idea is that if your chords are approximating cleanly and vibrating freely, then this will elicit the double wave because there's not going to be any tension preventing it. So, can you go and slide up very slowly? Now notice the double wave was still there, but it diminished.
Yeah.
So your job, don't sing, don't make a pretty noise. See if you can sort of feel like, what direction do I have to move in to keep the obnoxious sound going? Better. It diminished a little bit. Go a little slower. Obnoxious. Better. Yeah. I've practiced this a lot, you can tell. Je n'ai guère. And that was easier, yeah?
Yeah, I have to lift more in the back a little bit.
Okay, and you could tell that you did. So, and you could use your lips more too.
Oh, sure.
Je n'ai guère. Good. Now can you go for a little bit more? Je n'ai guère. Maybe it'll crack. That's okay. That sounds a lot more comfortable. Now, that might not be the right texture for this phrase, but let me hear you just kind of go, je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, sing it like that.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant.
Good. That's completely different from the way you did it before.
Yeah.
Do that again.
Je n'ai guère le temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amant.
Very good. Okay, so that's where I wanted to start. I picked this phrase because it's low, but it's also kind of chatty. It's closer to what she would be doing if she were actually speaking and telling a story. The next thing I want to do is this wonderful, qui veut mon âme, elle est prendre, because it starts on those low notes, and then how do you navigate away? So forget all about this and let's just remind yourself how to sing that phrase. So can you just play this for us, Carol? Qui veut mon âme, elle est prendre, the E flat. Qui veut mon âme. Okay, so right there.
Qui veut mon âme, elle est prendre, vous arrivez au bon moment.
Good. So and this is the same E flat and D that we were just working with. But you sort of like, yeah. We're back in. My first guitar was an old Beatles, a '68 Beatle, and you better believe I had to shift for that. But you've got the state-of-the-art Lexus now. So let's remind yourselves where that E flat is. So here you go. Je n'ai guère. Qui veut mon âme?
Qui veut mon âme?
Now, I'd like you to go, No, it may not crack, but I want you to be okay with it if it did, because I just did, maybe, but if not. Yeah.
If I start with the weight, that's leadership, that's that.
Okay, so let's just exploit that. And by the way, this is actually how they did it back in the bel canto era also. If you read like the old pedagogy books, they exploited, many of the great teachers would have their singles yodel, in and out of chest voice to get used to navigating the registers. So if they could do it, then we could do it too. So in fact, let me hear you kind of yodel a little bit. Good. Now, now what if you go? So find it first.
It's
It needs to be more obnoxious. Find it first. Good. No, that's exactly what I wanted you to do. Nobody's being a very good sport. One of the things that makes it difficult for us to learn how to sing is that figuring out how to get all the moving parts to work together often results in making some very strange noises. But you have to just forget about that and work on getting the moving parts to do their thing and not care about the sound so much. But if you really care about, like, oh my God, where's my voice, what's happening, then it makes it very hard to do that. So I really appreciate your willingness to do that. So let me hear you go again. It's evening out now.
yeah. Well, and the second one didn't start in the same place where the first one started, or didn't feel like it started. Did it sound?
What it sounds like is that you're sort of finding this middle area, that there's like more than one possibility. You don't have to go or but there's other things in between. Let me hear you go la blah blah.
Qui veut mon âme, elle d'apprendre.
And deliberately make it yodel once.
Okay. Was I having that yes, I lost touch for you too. Qui
So is
veut
it he started heavy? Yes.
Qui veut mon âme, elle d'apprendre.
Go on.
Vous arrivez au bon moment.
Very good. That actually did not sound as yodely as you probably think that it did.
That's a huge relief.
Yeah, I mean, it sounded a little bit yodely, but it didn't sound. It sounds like it's in the ballpark.
Well, it feels a lot better than it did 10 minutes ago.
It's really getting there, and I appreciate your hanging in there with me and trying these things. Okay, so sing again with the accompaniment, and all the way down to Caravagnon de l'Amant. Okay. Oh, but you gotta start with more than you think you can get away with.
Qui veut mon âme, elle d'apprendre. Vous arrivez au bon moment. J'ai un cœur de temps d'attendre, car avec mon nouvel amour, près du rapport civil, j'ai mon ami Linos Bastia. J'ai mon ami Linos Bastia. Nous dansons la seguidille pour du manzanilla. La 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 la.
Yeah. And again, like I really don't think that sounds.
It's not as jarring as it
No.
feels.
No,
Okay.
in fact, it's pretty close.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty close to where it needs to be. I was gonna say, are you recording this? We're recording this. You can listen to it.
Very possibly my dad.
So you can see it, but the thing is, I think, I mean, just in like the space of 20 minutes or so, you made a really big change in the way that you were modulating registration in this piece. So that to me suggests that if you keep practicing in this way, it's going to get smoother and smoother and smoother. You just have to be willing for it to start out yodely, weird, awkward, unstable, and trust that it's really just muscles and movements that you need to just sort of train and practice and habituate, and then it's going to get better. And again, like doing it in a group setting, there's a little bit more leverage, right? Because like we all want you to get it, and you want to show us that you get it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to start having a studio class, because when there's a little bit more leverage, as long as it's not unmanageable, then that can really help make faster practice. But Hillary, I think you sound a whole lot more like Carmen now. Well, you sound more like you.
That, yes.
You sound like you, and I think that if you just keep practicing this and woodshedding it, that you're going to get it to a place where you're really happy with it. But you have to be willing to, like, what happens if I do this, and have it go splat, and like, oh, that was interesting. But thank you for being willing to take this for a walk.
Thanks for listening to my performance, you guys.
Good job.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I got it.
Unless we need it for.
Sure. Do you, I don't know, do I need this?
Do you have it, Carol? This is the Tosca.
Let's
So
see.
tell us who you are and what you're going to sing.
Okay, I'm Cabo Lucy.
Well, you're actually Mark Bergowitz.
Well, yes, I'm Mark Bergowitz. For the next 10 minutes.
Otherwise,
Yes. I'm going to sing Recondita Harmonia from the beginning of Tosca. And basically, he has a very, very jealous girlfriend who he loves very much. And he's a painter, and he's musing on how the painting that he's doing of somebody who doesn't look like his girlfriend sort of does. As red as I feel.
No.
That's instructive, all right? You might be standing there in front of your audition panel thinking, you know, you look one way when actually you just look the way you always do. So I would like you to just relax your abdominal muscles a little bit. And I know it's tough when you're attending a class like this, especially if you worked all day, and I don't know if you had time to warm up today, but then all of a sudden you have to get up and sing. Let me hear you just go, what's the first pitch?
What?
D.
It's D F?
Can I hear you go? Just sing arpeggio on ah. Release your breath. A major.
Huh?
A major.
Oh,
I don't know if I did that or not. Hold this against your abdominal muscles and just release and sustain the note. You feel how much you're pushing on it?
Very much,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, so see if you just get that to relax and good, one more time. Okay, so see if you can just release without the additional thrust from your abs. So one more time. Now this might be a strange thing to do, but can I just ask you to sing the first phrase of the song with the massager on your abs? This is just a magic wand massager. If you guys haven't seen this, I use this in my studio. It's not for use on this part of your instrument. It's good for the big muscles. And what I'm doing with Mark right now is just giving him a little bit of a massage for his abdominal muscles, not just to encourage them to relax a little bit, but so that you can feel what's happening, because you don't always necessarily know if you're driving or pushing. But just the stimulation that you get from this gives you a little bit of feedback so you can tell what's actually going on. So you notice that you were engaging a lot more than what you wanted to or needed to. And where this is related to registration is that those of you who've worked with me know that I'm very interested in sort of like isolating and working with these activities of phonation or speech and airflow or the release of the breath. They're the two most efficient means that we have for actually getting the vocal folds to vibrate, in my opinion. And almost every singer that I've worked with comes in with a native preference for one or the other of these things. And if it's an opera singer with a big voice, usually we just want to muscle everything out and then only allow the breath to release when we feel like we have to, because we can't get away with muscling it out anymore. And so one of the things that makes it feel like we need to muscle things out is that if we feel like there's this resistance or this weightiness, right, in our throats that's being created by like the intensity that we need for the sound, then we're going to have to sort of like tighten up there, make sure it's nice, your chords are nice and thick, and then drive a lot of air against it. Then I'm going to make a big noise, and that's the way I sang for most of my life. And it didn't feel very good, but I was able to like make some noise on certain notes in certain contexts. But I'm much happier now because I found out that if you can release your breath really well, then you can get your vocal folds to engage and respond and be more passive without having to sort of like hold them in a weightier position. And you can even access what I would think would be like a fairly heavy registration in that part of your range without having to push against it. So once you started relaxing here, I felt like you didn't have as much air as you wanted, but it felt better. So let's just get you to a place where you feel like you can just release your breath well and get the sound that you want. So, then you just go, oh.
Oh.
Good. Is that still our first note? Hey, they call it all.
Oh, you mean that one. Right.
Okay, wait, so, oh, falsetto. Alright, do that again, just go, oh, and start this one. Okay, you go, ah, on the same note, ah, your first note,
Wait,
ah, in your range.
Oh.
Right, so just, ah, and sustain,
Oh.
yes, do that again.
Oh.
Right, and now he's not driving or pushing. Right, do that one more time.
Oh.
Now what if I ask you to go, ooh, on the next note?
Ooh.
Ha!
Oh.
Okay, so stay relaxed. It might take a little bit more time for your voice to respond, but ha!
Oh.
Okay, there was less engagement, but see if you could just release it and not engage there. Go again.
Oh.
Now can you? Ha!
Oh.
Good. Do it again.
Oh.
Very nice. Okay, start the aria again. Now, what Mark, an old habit of yours, if you don't mind my sharing it, was that he got really good at releasing his breath so that he could just like let his voice respond and the air goes and everything was great. But then as soon as he had it, he started like trying to like prop it up with a little bit of extra pressure to make sure that it would stay. And we can't really do that. We have this language that isn't all that helpful. We think about holding notes, but you can't hold a note. You have to keep creating the note. You have to keep, generating the note. And so if you start the sound by releasing your breath, and then you just could keep releasing your breath at the same rate, there's a good chance that you will continue to create the note. But you have to persuade yourself that everybody else is coming and like really want to help. So let me hear you go again. Ha!
Ha.
Ha!
Ha.
Feel how it wants to
Yeah.
engage right away? Go again. Ha!
Ha.
It doesn't engage. Ha! Keep creating it.
Ha.
Okay, start the aria again. Okay, so that's much more easy production. Okay, so it feels a little bit better?
Yeah. It felt.
Do you feel like
I
you're doing
guess-
enough?
Well, I guess I was trying to focus on that, and so I felt like I wasn't focusing on too much of my vowels, and
They happened.
Okay,
They were
alright.
vowels. We'll find out later.
Okay.
And it's true that we can really only focus on one thing at a time. And so things happen in master classes that I've attended where like we'll have a really great master teacher and they'll be focusing on something like getting the breath to release, and the breath releases and the sound is huge and everybody's happy, and then somebody complains, what about the vowels? We work on the vowels too, but now it's time to work on other things. So your vowels are gonna be fine. Okay, so in terms of like a registration issue for this aria, it's kind of for me what we talked about earlier, that feeling like there's a way in which you can really kind of hook and push and get away with it up until a point, but the build to the big climax at the end, at some point, that's not going to work and you're going to have to change your strategy, so you may as well just sing in a way that's not hooky-pushy all the way through. Can we jump to the end? Let me just hear you sing, "Ah, your soul," and so on. just the big finish.
I mean, where?
Oh,
El mío?
yeah.
Yeah, he's okay.
Il mio solo pensiero, il mio solo pensiero sei tu. Oscar, sei tu.
Good. It's already a lot better now that you're taking a more relaxed approach to this. So let's just see if we can get it better still.
I feel like I'm pushing up my jaw. I don't know. I don't know why, but I guess whatever I was trying to keep steady so that it freed up
Change what
this.
you're doing with your jaw?
It changed what I was. It felt like it changed what I was doing with my jaw, but I'm not sure.
Okay, I will
Yeah.
keep an eye on your jaw. I was just
Okay.
really happy that you're breathing relaxed a bit. Does your jaw feel okay?
No, it feels fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
because we can massage that too if we need to. So encouraging just more, more reliance on releasing the breath rather than feeling like you've got to sort of like yell, push, drive the sound, works really well for phrases like this. So can I hear you just do a little bit of work in falsetto? Let me hear you go, ooh, and pull off that pitch. Good. Now falsetto is kind of an extreme of registration. And so when you're working with the voice in this range, it can be very useful to just practice releasing the breath and having and eliciting a falsetto or cracked response, because then you know there's not going to be any resistance. And the thing is, the movement that you have to go through, the way that you have to use your air to be able to do it this way is actually not as different from engaging the full voice as you might think. Because you're still, the physics of it, you're still releasing your breath, the chords are coming together because of Bernoulli's principle. And so the only difference is one of registration. Rather than just this little membrane on the edges of your vocal folds meeting, you want to be able to manage your resources so that you encourage the full body of your vocal folds to vibrate together. But practicing this part of it without having to worry about that frees you up from thinking that you've got to really generate a lot of breath pressure and all that. So let me hear you just go, ooh. Good. And it can also help you to equalize out between like the higher note and then the lower note, because sometimes if you're singing a phrase like this, we feel like we go strong, back off strong. Whereas if it's just sliding around here falsetto, you can go ooh. So you can be more consistent now. So I feel like you're letting go of something all the way to ooh. Just do that. It's better. It's still a little bit of air escaping.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Do that again. Good. And now the vowels, so I always, something like that. Good. And it still sounds to me like he's blowing a little bit of air through the low note.
Yeah.
And so also isolating this and doing it falsetto can expose something like that you might not have realized that you were doing. So if you're going great guns for those high notes, but then you don't sort of let things evolve the way that they need to for the low notes, well, it'll be like loud, soft, loud, soft.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm communicating, then I'm doing something else, right? When it's really just one sentence. So find out what your voice needs. Good. And what you're saying is like, oh, my only thoughts are of you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of is a sigh. Wouldn't it be great if you could feel more like you're sighing when you sing this? Do that one more time. Good. Oh, mio sol pensier. Good. Now what if I asked you to sing a full voice but do pretty much the same thing? You're going to have to get a good breath and really ha, really commit to it. Let's see what happens if you try.
Il mio sole pensiero sei tu. Oscar, sei tu.
That sounded really easy.
It felt a lot easier.
Yeah, it can go farther in that direction.
Yeah. I only kind of felt engaging at the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we didn't practice the very end. Let's practice the very end.
Okay.
So let me hear you do sort of a version of the wobble exercise, but in falsetto.
Okay.
On those two notes, so it's hold, hold. So go in the other direction. Let me go. Ooh, and so on. Now, the first time you went up for the higher note, there was a little bit of engagement, and then you didn't the second time. So you just go, ooh, and then stop. And just really release up.
Oscar.
Yeah. And if you do that, it sounds like you could sustain that note for as long as you wanted. Okay? I'll go back and do I'm your soul.
Il mio sole pensiero sei tu. Oscar, sei tu.
Really good. Now, if you compare what you just did with the way you sang it the first time, I would actually say that you did a better job of modulating your registration up to the high note. But it doesn't sound lighter, right? It sounds just as full because rather than feeling like you've got to sort of like tighten and push to get the loud sound to come out, you're just singing more acoustically. And so we get your nice big dramatic sound and the color of your voice, but because your throat is free and because you're, you know, articulating good vowels and just allowing your voice to take the breath that it needs, we hear the power of your voice, and it probably is going to be more powerful and project better than if you did it the other way. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay. So Julia,
Oh boy.
you have show us your thing because we've got to figure out what we're gonna look at. Okay. So we just wanted to take a look at some places in. This is from
Our town.
and the area is.
This is Goodbye World.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this.
So Emily is dead, and she has been taken back. She has the opportunity to watch a normal day of her family as it was, and she, in the process of doing this, is so overcome with emotion that she begs to be taken back to the land of the dead.
So where are the registration challenges here? I can guess what it would be. This looks like fun.
Yeah, that's a good one.
There are a number of places where she has to go back and forth between a C on the staff and a D below the staff. So it doesn't really matter. Let's just do the one where she did it twice in a row. Wait a minute. Where is it? I was just looking at it. Okay. So Carol, this is measure 733. Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Okay.
Every minute of it. Can you just play that melody for us? Okay, can you just, like, you've been sitting here for 2 hours? Just kinda like, let's bust it out. Okay.
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
I've never heard you sing this, have I?
I think we've
You
just
did it
troubleshot
once,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
This I'm really glad you're working on this. Okay, so I felt like everything went in the right place, but I did feel like you had to sort of like shift gears to get there. Do it one more time.
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Good. And that's where the breath is going to go after life.
Yeah.
So don't apologize for it.
Okay.
And it's a perfectly good phrase, but if you're going to say, does anybody ever realize life while they live it? And because there's this sort of very syllabic setting that Orm has given it, it feels like you can't phrase it that way, but you can. Because these pitches and these rhythms are just there to help you express the phrase, and this is how he thought you should express it. So, speak it that way once. Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Yeah. So, don't ever apologize for taking a breath when you need one. Composers know that we need to breathe. Audiences know that we need to breathe. The thing is that if you decide where you're going to breathe, you have to really commit to it. And even sometimes you might have to do it all of a sudden in the middle of a performance when you didn't have as much breath as you planned on having. But if you will give it the dramatic subtext that will justify the breath, then we're just going to think it was a brilliant decision. Even if it's in the middle of a word. So yeah, we will always forgive you for taking a breath. We will not forgive you for running out of breath. Because if you run out of breath, we run out of breath with you. And we're like, okay, so sing it one more time and really intend that phrasing. I mean, do his rhythms, but intend what you're saying.
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Good. And I think that you could do even more of that. So just play with it. But one of the things that that taking the breath there does for her is it gives her a chance to sort of, come down, reset, onset on the low note intentionally, not feeling like you have to catch up or the song's going to get away from you. So breathing more intentionally is also going to help you do whatever registration shift you need to do more intentionally. But then the other thing I want to ask you about this phrase is, why do you think he said it this way? Why does it have to go, does anybody, why does it go down like that? What's he expressing?
I feel like she's sobbing.
So it's like, anybody, like that?
Yeah.
Okay, do that.
Okay.
And just do the
Anybody,
and you don't have to sing. Just what does it feel like to go from anybody without the pitches? Can you just kind of sob it? Anybody. Let's all try that.
Anybody.
Do that again.
Anybody.
Can you say the whole phrase like this? Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
And now it sounds more like you're sobbing. So I don't know if that's what he was thinking about, but I think it's a really good interpretation of it. So sing it that way in a more exaggerated than what it says. Does anybody?
Okay.
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Yes. Now, how did that feel?
Pretty sloppy.
I don't think it was as sloppy as you thought that it was. But we're willing to be sloppy for now.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of sloppy stuff so far. So can you play that for her as well? So we are just let it be sloppy. Sobbing is sloppy. Death is sloppy.
Does anybody ever realize life while they live it?
Good. And now I feel like she's just sort of automatically making the registration shift that she needs to, and I don't hear the gears whirring. I don't feel like I'm planning it, I'm gonna stick it over there, then I'm gonna go over here. And I'm also not hearing sort of like bump, 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 but this sort of syllabic, I'm doing the rhythms, and you can hear that I'm doing rhythms. Because you need to persuade us that you're not singing.
Right.
Unless you are. Sometimes characters are singing, but in this case, Emily doesn't know that she's singing. And it's just a way of using rhythms and pitches to heighten the intensity of the moment. So this is always my first line of inquiry if something isn't working the way that you want it to. rather than look at it mechanistically, again, the whole idea was like, we're all gonna get together and talk about registration, which is, a mechanical thing and a technical thing. But if you find out, like, why is it there? Why does that note have to be low? Why do I have to get to that low note from a high note? And you really can sort of internalize the dramatic subtext of it, then that will automatically solve a bunch of problems. Whereas if you don't have the right intention, you don't have a strong intention, and you're just trying to like go about it mechanistically, you're never going to solve the problem, because the problem might be caused by the fact that you're not really saying anything, or you're not really saying what it is that you need to say. So always address that first. It was so fun. Can you just sort of solve on this again?
Sure.
Go, actually, maybe you go, does anybody
ever realize life while they live it?
every minute of it?
Every minute of it. Every moment of it.
Okay, so sing it now.
Okay.
Because that's a completely different affect than you had before. Now, I don't think that, Emily's she's more polite than that.
Yeah.
But I think that if you do that, but you let it be contained by these pitches and rhythms, then we're going to get Emily. Try it. And be willing to go too far.
Okay. Does anybody ever realize life while they live it? Every minute of it. Every moment of it.
That was great. So, did that solve your problem?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay, what is there anything else about it that you feel like you could be doing better?
It feels, I don't know, I guess it just feels sloppy still.
Okay, so if it feels, does it feel a little disjointed? Does it still feel
Yeah,
like
it's a little.
Okay, so let's
Ooh, choice.
let's do the choice. And going in a different direction. Can you give me an obnoxious? So before you put the it's a little bit singy. It's a little bit singy.
Okay.
So, and not all the way over the sides.
Okay.
So start without touching it, and now move it in. Here you go. Good. Can you just do it a couple of? She's not quite getting there. You hear that? You have to be willing to.
Yeah.
And you can slow it down, but again, these are really fun to work with if you just sort of like explore, like, what direction do I have to go in to be able to keep the wave going? And it's usually going to teach you something about how things have to shift in your throat so that you can do what it is that you want to do to keep it free. It's going to feel a little weird. Go slow. Good. Now start there and go. So now just go one more time. Okay, and now just try singing again. Don't think about it so much.
Okay. Does anybody ever realize life while they live it? Every minute of it. Every moment of it.
Good. So was that less sloppy?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it seemed more connected.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that's nice about this exercise is that once you do it, you don't have to do it that much. If you show your throat that there's a like more direct line between point A and point B, and it's easier and there's no resistance there, then the body tends to get that and adapt and learn it and habituate it pretty quickly. Because otherwise, the other way doesn't feel good. But you have to give yourself the opportunity to find out that there is a easier path, a less obstructed, less resistant path. Now, I thought that you sounded great the first time you sang it, but it's getting better. And again, like I'm hearing more view in it now. And that's what's interesting about hearing like your voice on this piece, because I think that there's a lot of, there needs to be a lot of emotional weight and maturity for Emily, but she doesn't start her journey throughout the course of the show. So being able to have like a substantial sound like yours, able to perform this already at the end is a really great thing. Thank you.
Cool, thanks.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, David, for setting up the live stream for us. And thank all of you for tuning in or watching it after the fact. I'm going to try to do this once or twice a month, and I hope that you'll continue to join me, and we'll try to keep it interesting.